Alright people, you already know what time it is. It is time for another tier list video. This time including a lot of the decks and strategies out of EX1, the classic collection. So lots of cool new cards to work with and kind of just taking a step back and looking on the decks of the BT6 meta and how they will be going into the EX1 meta. As far as my opinion goes, again, this is all very opinionated. And if you guys do disagree or agree, perhaps, on any of my choices in this video, by all means leave that in the comment section below. I love reading your guys' comments on deck choices and thoughts and stuff, and why you think certain cards are good or not, because there's definitely things I could have missed. I'm not an expert on every single one of these decks, but I will try my best to kind of explain why I think a deck is good and what like category I think it should fall in. But anyway, so let's go ahead and get started with our first one here. So I'm going to start with Miss Mastimon here. So Mastimon, I think, is a really solid Digimon this format, specifically the yellow version, just because it has access to things like Dynasmon and Blinding Ray, Bushiagumon, Starmon, Pulsemon. There's so many good toolboxy yellow cards, and especially because trashing your opponent's security is really good this format because of all these security control esque decks running around, decks that play lots of option cards in their security stuff that you want to get rid of. So I'd put this deck definitely at tier 1, probably at the lower end of the spectrum, just because I think it falls a little bit short of being like one of the top decks, like the decks to beat in this format, but I do definitely think it is a really solid deck overall. Alright. So, next deck we got here is Three Musketeers. Three Musketeers has been a really fun deck that I've been enjoying this format, and it's a deck that has a lot of capabilities when it comes to grinding and outplaying your opponent just from resources that you can get back from your trash constantly. And then, of course, all the removal cards you have access to, Trump Sword, Fly Bullet, Happy Bullet, Showering, all those really powerful cards. So I think Three Musketeers has a lot of things going for it, but it does also have some bad matchups. Specifically, I would say like Rookie Rush / Gabubon, as weird as that sounds. Gabubon is a deck that deck struggles with, and any deck that can just kind of go through your security quick enough before you get a chance to like set up your trash. But I would still definitely put Three Musketeers at a tier 1 status. I could see the argument for it being like tier 1.5, but I still think it is a really solid pick, and I've been able to see success with it in the set 6 format. Even going into set EX1, I think it'll still be nice. So we got Eosmon next here. Eosmon, as fun of a deck as I think it is, lots of cool ways you can build a deck. I've seen blue lists, I've seen yellow lists of Eosmon, so it's a really cool card. But guys, do I really even need to talk about like the fact that this deck is not good? Like, Ultimate Rush is just unfortunately not the way to go, and Eosmon as a boss monster does do some stuff, but it's not really worth setting up your trash for multiple turns just to get a delete 1 Digimon. So I think there's just many other ways to go about it, hence why I don't think Eosmon is particularly amazing in this format. So next we got green control, just like any green deck playing like Nidhogg control or Fleeshimon control. I think green has been kind of taking a back burner in the set 6 format because a lot of the other colors are just so powerful. Green didn't really get anything useful out of set 6 aside from like some cool little cards like Eldradimon or like Ancient Troymon, I guess, but nothing that like completely shifts the game like Nidhogg did back in BT4. I probably put it at a tier 2 position just because I don't think green has seen much success in this format, and I don't really think that's going to change much in the next format. In fact, it's probably going to get even more skewed because we get cards like Ice Wall, because black and purple get a lot of support in that set as well. That green really just doesn't do too much. They don't have removal. Their only control card is really like Nidhogg himself. Being able to pierce through your opponent's Digimon is nice, things like Hercules, Kabuterimon, but the fact that one Gaia Force or one Fly Bullet or one swing of Gabumon can put this deck back like multiple turns. It's just a little bit too slow. Even with stuff like Mimi, I don't think green is going to be doing too much. Not to say it's terrible, but I think the deck is just like carried by Nidhoggmon. So then as far as Azulongmon goes, okay, Source Strip decks, Azulongmon, Hexablow, I think the Azulongmon as a card is really, really good. I think being able to go into him and like check your opponent's whole security stack and maybe finishing it off with an Omnimon is really nice. However, the problem is that the deck is blue and not red, so you can't delicate plan unless you're playing some like crazy spice. But in standard list, right? The fact that you can check multiple security cards is nice, but against a lot of matchups like Three Musketeers, Agubond, Security Control, hitting multiple security cards is, chances are you're probably going to run into something, and going into a 5-cost Digimon that, you know, will just end up dying to a Gaia Force, and not only that, but like your secondary Digimon Hexablow doesn't really do anything aside from stunning your opponent's field, but that also just loses to every other deck in the game. I don't think Azulongmon really does like much at all. So unfortunately, I'm probably going to put this in the rogue category. It can definitely do some cool stuff, but I don't think this deck will be topping any regionals anytime soon. So then now we've got what I would say are probably two of the best decks in this game. Okay, we got both Bond decks here. Okay, Agubon and Gabumon, both insane for two different reasons. I'm going to tell you straight up, I'm putting both of these in tier 1. Okay, now as far as which one I think is better, I'd probably say EX1 included. Gabumon definitely takes the cake. Alright, so let me rearrange this a little bit. Mastermon, go down here. So I'm going to put the decks like this. Now Gabumon was already strong enough, guys. Okay, this deck's consistent. One of the most consistent decks in the game. You can play your memory boost. You can play like 16 rookies, you're constantly drawing, and then you've got stuff like Gabumon, Bond of Friendship that can swing multiple times, bottom deck multiple Digimon. You've got Lobomons to go for game, Hammer Spark to gain memory. Now add an EX1 where you now have Analog Youth to again make your consistent deck even more consistent, gaining memory and hatching an egg also whenever your Gabumon is destroyed is also crazy. And then of course you also get what is arguably one of the most busted option cards to ever be printed in this game. That is Ice Wall. Ice Wall is going to be a serious issue. Not only does it have the Hammer Spark effect in security, but it also just prevents your opponent from going for game in a lot of scenarios. You play it for a 1 cost, your opponent, all of their Digimon will lose 2 memory every single time they attack. So in a lot of scenarios, they just basically prevents you from losing. So really degenerate card, really powerful card, and I think that will push Gabumon over the edge and just make it like the deck to beat for the format. I think the deck is like absolutely insane. Okay, so as far as some of the other decks, we got Dynasmon here. So Dynasmon, I think, is a really, really good card. I would probably put this, if you're running like yellow Dynasmon with Mastamon, I put this in like 1.5. Similar, in a similar vein to Mastamon. In fact, I'm probably gonna put Mastamon down here for a little bit, because I don't think it's quite to the level as these decks. Hence why I guess there is a tier 1.5. But Dynasmon is a really annoying card to deal with. However, aside from recovery, he doesn't really do much. But being able to constantly keep yourself at 3 and surviving is really, really essential. It is also a great counter against decks like Gabumon that will swing multiple times in your turn. So effectively getting you that Holy Wave effect every single time they attack, or like once per turn, once per copy of Dynasmon, right? So Dynasmon's really nice. And then as far as the other decks go, so we got Lilithmon here. So Lilith Loop, I think is a really crazy deck. So the deck, I do think, requires a lot of setup. Your first couple of turns will just be spent drawing, discarding, triggering Sunomon and you know, the Lady Devimon and stuff like that. But then also with the advent of Analog Youth, this deck also gets more consistent. You also then have a white source that is not Manoa, a white source that actually does something that you can play in the deck for your copies of Mega Digimon Fusion to go into Zwart and then to loop your Lilithmon. So I would probably put Lilithmon at a tier 1.5. I think it is a very scary deck once you get going, being able to go into your Lilithmon, and then also having the secondary Digimon as Titamon, as a lot of lists are playing Titamon with the Ginkakumon Promote being able to swing multiple times in a turn, like swinging, going into your Zwart, bringing back your Promotes, and then all of them have Rush. It's just really crazy. Lots of damage in a single turn is absolutely fantastic. So I think Lilithmon still a really, really solid deck. Now, for our other green pick on this list, I have put down Ancient Troymon, who, funny enough, I actually do think Ancient Troymon, as a card, is not a terribly designed card. Being able to suspend 2 of your opponent's Digimon any single time one of your opponent's Digimon attacks kind of prevents your opponent from going too wide and kind of punishes them for doing so, because then you can just run over all their Digimon the following turn. And then not only that, but of course he does float into a green hybrid, which we only have 2 at this point in the game. But I don't think this deck is really good at all. I would definitely put this in the rogue category. However, I do think these cards will get better with time, especially with set 7. But it's just not there yet, especially with EX1. Like, green gets new cards, but it doesn't really do anything for the 10 warriors, like the green ancient hybrid deck. Okay, now for the other hybrid decks, I got Ancient Greymon and Ancient Garurumon here. Ancient Greymon, I do think, will be a very solid deck. Okay, so in set 6, we've got Ancient Blue Gabumon being played, and I also think that deck is pretty decent, but it will get better because of Analog Youth. Okay, Analog Youth is actually a really broken card. It fixes a lot of issues certain decks have. So imagine this, right, for Ancient Greymon. So you're at 3 memory. You go into your promo Agunimon for a cost of 2. You then attack with Agunimon. Agunimon's, when attacking, says you can Digivolve into an Ancient Greymon for a cost of 2, and then it dies at the end of the turn. So now you currently go over your opponent's side to 1. The attack finishes. You'll check at least 2 security cards, 3 if you've got like the Flamemon underneath it, and then your Ancient Greymon will die. Well, now what happens when he dies is not only do you get to play a hybrid, potentially searching off of a Flamemon or something, but with Analog Youth on the field, you can then suspend Analog Youth, gain a memory to go back to 0, and then hatch a Digi-Egg, continuing your plays and continuing your turn, effectively making that Ancient Greymon exchange a 3 memory cost and getting a free egg in the process. So you got that kind of like Mimi effect as well. Okay, so before EX1, Ancient Garurumon was kind of like the only Ancient that saw play, because you can go Lobomon, Ancient Garurumon for a total cost of 3, and the 3 threshold is really important. But with the advent of Analog Youth, Ancient Greymon, I think, becomes much more relevant, especially because checking 2 to 3 security cards is really, really crazy for a 13,000 Digimon that you just warped into for free. Warping is just really good this format. All right, so I think Ancient Greymon, I would probably put him at a 1.5, and then Ancient Blue, like Gabumon, I would also put probably at this 1.5 list. I don't think they're good enough to compete with the top decks, but I do think they are overall really, really solid, and you get a lot of values out of these cards that you did not before. Okay, now, next deck here, we got Genkumon as a stand-in for Black Royal Knights. So this deck, I could see being put in one of 2 places. I could see this being put in Tier 1 or Rogue. Okay, now, the reason why I say that is that Black is still a really, really slow deck. Okay, the way that Black Royal Knights is played with Genkumon, Alphamon, and Craniumon especially makes it a very good anti-meta deck to a lot of the strategies like Security Control, like Agumon, 3 Musketeers, all these removal cards that Craniumon just shuts down, and then you've got your aggressors like Alphamon and Genkumon to kind of help you with that. Of course, you've also got access to stuff like Mechanori, and Ultimate Flare, and Iron Fist Onslaught, etc. So hence why I think against certain decks, like Craniumon is just a blowout card, and that makes this deck very, very viable. I do think it's a really great deck. However, against other certain matchups, it's very one-sided. Against, your yellow and green decks, Craniumon is like not doing nearly as much, and the deck just feels very, very slow. So for now, I think I would probably put Black Knights at a 1.5 status, probably like a high 1.5 status, right next to like Mastamon, just because I do think it is still a very slow deck. Alphamon is a great card. He does get you a lot of value, but he really doesn't do anything aside from just gaining memory. Doesn't have any form of removal. Your only forms of removal are still Genkumon, which is a guarantee, not a guarantee, it's based on your opponent's board state. Okay, so that's why I think Black Royal Knights still a very solid deck, but not really like, I don't know. I think it's a very solid anti-meta pick, but not something that I would confidently say can beat the tier 1 decks. Okay, so for the other picks down here, we have got lots of decks actually hidden underneath these images, so I'm going to move those for a second. Lots of decks still to get through, so don't worry. Hopefully you see your favorite deck on here. I think that's it. Okay, so we've got, let's start on the left here with Tidamon Control. Okay, so I mentioned Tidamon is really insane in Lilith Loop especially, but even by himself, coming out of EX1, you've got a lot more tools, a lot of more retaliation cards, and then like that Wizardmon that gives retaliation Digimon Rush, and you've got King Kakumon Promote. I think even as a standalone deck, with maybe your secondary mega being like Mastamon or something, Tidamon is a really crazy card. I honestly did not give this card nearly as much credit when set 6 initially came out, so I will definitely give it credit in EX1 format. I do think this is a 1.5 deck. I think Tidamon is a really solid pick, has a lot of powerful plays that you can do, albeit a little bit slow, does require some setup, but still an overall solid pick. Really nice matchup against Security Control and 3 Musketeers, especially being able to swing with a 14,000 Digimon that checks 2 cards is pretty scary at times. Alright, so then we got one of my favorite old school decks, Ulforce Vidramon here, got support in the recent starter decks. However, I don't think the starter decks were nearly as good as like I wanted them to be, and unfortunately doesn't really do anything for your Ulforce strategy, whereas the old school Ulforce was just focused on swinging, constantly unsuspending, and attacking your opponent's Digimon for multiple security checks. I do think that is really good, and if he could do it by himself without any setup, I would definitely think this is a more relevant deck, but because you need like blue tamers on the field that just don't give you enough value, I would definitely put this in the rogue category. Okay, now D-Brigade. Alright guys, D-Brigade I think is a really solid deck. Okay, D-Brigade, security control, especially with you know, Analog Youth, your black control cards like Ultimate Flare, Iron Fist, Onslaught, and as well as the I believe it is the Dracomon out of the starter deck, the one that searches Drummon cards, the blue level 3. So all of these cards, and then Corgemon as well, all these cards do wonders for the deck, for the archetype, and Commandramon is still a very resilient kind of archetype there. And then of course you got the boss Dark Dramon, who can just plop himself down on the field, get rush, put your resources back, which is very relevant against a lot of the grindy decks in the format. Okay, so security control, Commandramon slash D-Brigade deck, I would say is a 1.5 deck for sure. The deck is really solid, and I know a lot of people are hyped for D-Brigade actually being relevant in the, at least like last format, is really solid, and this format I still think it is really good. So that's why I would say for D-Brigade. Now for Jesmon, alright. Jesmon is a insanely powerful card, but I do think it is hindered just a little bit by the consistency of the deck. Unfortunately, just the way you have to build it, because you are implementing so many option cards, so many white Digimon that you can't evolve. Jesmon as a deck is very inconsistent. However, the ceiling is really high. Okay, being able to just OTK your opponent, like truly OTK, like being able to go through their whole security stack, finish them off with an Omnimon or an Agunimon or something like that, and then having access to cards like Judgment of the Blade to get rid of their unsuspended Digimon, and then unsuspending multiple times, or like attacking multiple times with the Savior Huckmon, and then being able to have access to a Delicate Plane, which is one of the best option cards in this format. I think Jesmon is still definitely a tier 1 deck, albeit a little bit inconsistent at times, so the matchup can feel bad against some of the other tier 1 decks if you don't draw the right combo pieces. But when you do get those pieces, I think players in the recent regionals have proved that this deck can still compete with the meta, and it is still really, really powerful. Okay, so for the next deck here, we've got, I would say, green OTK, so just another green deck, which I would, again, have to put it tier 2. As good of a card as Grand Kuwagamon was in the past, just being able to check multiple security cards and then go into a Chaosmon or something is really nice. The problem is, against a lot of the tier 1 decks, you're going to die on, like, the first or second check. Okay, now, that's not to say... I'm not trying to say, like, Digimon that check multiple security cards are bad, because that's not the case at all, okay? However, I don't think Grand Kuwagamon is that great, mainly because, like, he's a green Digimon, and, like, green as a color is just behind the other colors, okay? So, again, green as a color I don't think is, like, super powerful right now, hence why all 3 of the decks I've listed have been either tier 2 or rogue. Alright, so next contender here, we've got Shoutmon. Shoutmon, I think, actually is a really nice deck, especially, again, because it is red, and if you're playing a red deck, you have access to Delicate Plan. So this format, I think it does play similarly to Jesmon, where you're just trying to OTK your opponent with your Shoutmon, with your Omnimons, and then, you know, run over their unsuspended Digimon with, like, Greymon. I do think it is still a really solid pick. The problem is, of course, it is still a 1-stack deck, but it doesn't do as much as Jesmon does, so I would probably put Shoutmon in the 1.5 category. Can still definitely compete, have access to a lot of powerful cards like Gaia Force, Atomic Blaster, Delicate Plan, Geo Greymon, etc., but it just falls a little bit short of what I would consider to be the best decks. Okay. So, for the other decks, so we got Lord Knightmon here, an old favorite of mine, but a deck I grew tired of after 10 years in the BT5 formats, as I'm sure a lot of other people did. Now, shout out to Dan Vang. This guy is legendary. He took Lord Knightmon. I believe he, like, won a regional with it. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. But the Lord Knightmon deck, I still think, has, like, gotten better over time, right? We've only gotten more yellow cards, and then I'm not sure EX1 really changes that, but as far as set 6 goes, this deck is still really solid. The issue is against some of the other meta decks, like 3 Musketeers, like Gabumon. They can just wipe your whole board in an instant. You can go into 1 Gabumon, bottom deck all your blockers, attack over the Lord Knightmon, and then it sets you back 3 turns. Jesmon can just run through Lord Knightmon, even if the DP is boosted, because Jesmon goes to 20 million DP, and then, of course, we'll check your whole security stack. You guys kind of catch my drift by now. But Lord Knightmon, I still do think, is a really solid Digimon, and has access to a lot of cool cards. You know, your whole yellow toolbox like Pulsemon and Patamon, getting Recovery, or getting Rush from Ibushi Agumon, or getting a 10,000 beater in the form of Lucemon, etc. So you've got a lot of cool things to work with, and a lot of DP reduction as well. But again, I think it's a product of the meta, because lots of decks in this format that are good, so like the Bonds just warp, so you really don't need to commit anything to the field, so the DP reduction doesn't do really a lot to them. And then 3 Musketeers that just hard play everything from hand, you're not really doing much to them with your board control either. So for those reasons, I would probably put Lord Knightmon again in that 1.5 category. But again, like we've seen, it's still a really solid deck. I don't mean to say these 1.5 decks cannot compete whatsoever with the tier 1 decks. I think they're just slightly below in terms of, like, raw power if you compare them directly, but they can definitely still compete in any sort of event. Okay. Now, next deck we got here is Security Control, represented by Mr. Zwart Defeat here. Security Control, I think, is one of the most fun decks ever made. Now, again, it's not very fun to play against, depending on who you ask, but I do think it has a lot of things going for it, especially in set 6, and, you know, we've gotten cards like Reinforcing Memory Boost, we got access to Geo Greymon and Cordramon, and even though in EX1 we are getting our own Cold Wave, okay, we're getting Emergency Program Shutdown, the white option card that basically prevents your opponent from using option cards for a turn, I still do think this is a tier 1 deck. This deck is still proven time again to be very resilient, very powerful, lots of recovery plays, lots of powerful blowout cards in your security, stuff like Iron Fist Onslaught, Gaia Force if you're running a red version, stuff like Wyvern's Breath, arguably one of the best removal option cards in the game. I definitely think security control is still really, really powerful. Okay, Ragnarlordmon, old favorite of mine, but sorry, bro, you are going in rogue tier. Unfortunately, Ragnarlordmon, being a security attack +1 rebooter is nice, but it just really doesn't do anything aside from being a 1-stack. That's not really difficult to out for any of the tier 1 decks. Okay, Shine Greymon, one of my favorite decks ever. Again, a product of the meta that this deck is just a little bit too slow, reliant on the setup of Tamers, whereas decks like, even if you're comparing other yellow decks like Mastamon, like Lord Knightmon, can just do what Shine Greymon does, but just more quick. Albeit not to the same high impact of Shine Greymon wiping your whole board, but it can do it quicker and more consistently. So I think I would probably put Shine at a tier 2 status. That is until set 7, but alas, my boy here is not the strongest deck in the format. Now, Greymon Tribal. Okay, now we're getting into the kind of EX1 decks here. Greymon Tribal, I think, has gotten a lot of cool different techs that have come out of EX1. You've got a lot more consistency cards, stuff like the Greymon and the Agumon that searches both Agumons, not only Agumons, Digimon with Agumon in their name, so also searches Bond of Bravery, and then as well as ties, and then Greymon can unload the ties from your hand, as well as these the Blitz Greymon, not Blitz Greymon, but the Greymon, War Greymon with Blitz. You guys know what I mean, the one in this picture here. This card being able to remove blockers is also really, really nice. I think Greymon Tribal, again, a little bit of a slow deck, but does have access to a lot of cool cards, stuff like Nokia, Gaia Force as your removal cards, Tai as well. So I would probably put this at a tier 1.5 status, maybe high tier 2. Definitely don't think it's the most powerful deck, but I do think it is an overall solid red pick, especially because you've got access to one of the most blowout red cards in the game, which is BT1 War Greymon. Okay, so I think just based on that fact, you could argue it competes with all the other meta decks, because all of the tier 1 decks usually have very strong security, maybe aside from maybe Gabumon or Jesmon, but I digress. Okay, so now we got Imperial German. Okay, so lots of new Imperial German support in EX1. Got the Jamming XVmon, got the new Imperial German, Pile German, Dino B, etc. Can also run stuff like Ice Wall if you so choose. But Imperial German is a really, really cool deck. Being able to swing multiple times, unsuspend, having jamming and all that stuff. I do think the new support is really solid. However, I don't think it is quite enough to push it to the tier 1 standpoint, but I would probably comfortably put this at a 1.5 alongside Tribal Greymon here. I don't think it is, again, it just doesn't have access to removal. It's a little bit too reliant on going into your boss monster, and once that boss monster is outed, you have to wait 3 turns before you can do anything again, whereas other decks the Bonds and stuff just would not care about that whatsoever. Yeah, so I don't think, unfortunately, Imperial German is too crazy of a deck. Now we've got Myotismon here, Venom Myotismon, lots of Myotismon support coming out of EX1. Guys, you know me, I love purple as much as the next guy, but unfortunately, I would probably put this in a rogue category. The cards they're just a little bit too slow, don't do enough. Getting the ability to revive your Retaliation Digimon, possibly letting them have Rush, is really cute, but it realistically just doesn't do enough against the meta decks. Okay, now what I think is one of the best archetypes out of EX1 is going to be Diaboromon, okay, for a couple of reasons, right? The first reason is the new Diaboromon allowing all of your Diaboromon to gain the blocker ability, okay? Blockers are a staple of this meta, okay? If you look at all the top tier decks, aside from maybe the Bonds, but you could argue those decks also play blockers, you've got stuff like Rebellion that is prominently played in Musketeers and any Titamon list. You've got Knightmon that is played in every Black Royal Knights list, and sometimes even Musketeers as well. You've got Gundramon as well. You've got lots of blockers in the forms of the Sistermons, and then you know, there's those cards are essential to the game, and having them is really nice. Now, what's even better than having multiple blockers on your field? Having blockers that have the Decoy ability, thanks to the promo Kurisarimon. I believe that's like the BT6 Dash Pack 1 or something like that. But the Kurisarimon gives all of your Diaboromon Decoy black-white, so basically meaning if one of your other Digimon would be deleted by a card effect, you can delete this Digimon instead. So having your tokens being able to protect your Diaboromon like throughout both players' turn is just really, really valuable. It's so annoying to deal with, especially because the tokens have like really weird stats. Okay, it's different when you're spamming the board with like Jesmons, or like Jesmon is using like his ability to spam Sistermons, because all the Sistermons are like level 3 to level 4, so they get wiped by Gewaltschwarmer. They're all very low DP. Okay, however, so there's a lot of option cards that cover ground with those. However, with the Diaboromon tokens, I think they're all like 13 play cost or something, and like 5,000 DP, or I don't remember the DP specifically, but I know the play cost is really a really high stat. Okay, so that alone makes Gewaltschwarmer like doesn't do anything against this deck, which again, that's a blowout card against a lot of decks, and so it makes it so that your opponent, for the most part, unless they have like Happy Bullet Showering specifically, and like you have nothing else that is lower than one of your tokens, it makes it so your opponent has to remove your Digimon one by one. Okay, however, they all have Decoy, so they can't get rid of the Diaboromon that's giving them all blocker. Okay, so then they have to get rid of one of the tokens, and then the tokens you can just make easily with stuff like your Aratas Tamer, stuff like Catastrophe Cannon, stuff like the set 5 Diaboromon, I believe, that just summons a token on Digivolve. So all in all, the deck doesn't have a lot of removal, but it does have a lot of control, a lot of board presence, and a lot of board presence that is difficult to remove, and I think that is a recipe for a tier 1 deck. Maybe that's a little bit much, considering it is Diaboromon, and how Diaboromon has just like not shown up whatsoever in the meta. This is my prediction for EX1 meta. I think Diaboromon will be a really insane deck. Okay, now, last deck we got here is my boy Machinedramon. I know a lot of people are hyped for Machinedramon because he's a really cool Digimon, but we haven't really gotten a meta viable one like ever. The first one we got was the blocker that de-digivolves to, and then that guy is like nichely played in some decks, but this guy, you can really build a deck around him, and I do think his ability is really solid. So for one, your opponent cannot reduce his DP, and that is during all turns. Okay, so not only is it better than something like Eldraudimon, which can only not be reduced during your opponent's turn, but like if you swing security and you run into Wyvern's Breath, it just doesn't do anything. So that's already one layer of protection. The other layer of protection that he has is to be able to prevent himself from deletion via battle and card effect. So not only can he not be reduced by DP, or like his DP can't be reduced, but he also has that Craniumon effect to an extent. Like it's not like he can't be destroyed by card effect, but you can just detach 2 materials to save him. So you have multiple layers of protections. Maybe it's more fair to compare to like Millenniumon. Okay, but my point is like your opponent needs to spend multiple resources in order to out this one card that you played from your hand, which by the way can get 5 inherited effects on it, including reboot, blocker, piercing, security, attack +1. The list goes on. Okay, so there's a lot of really cool things you can do with this Digimon. I think, again, it doesn't have any crazy removal aspects to it, but just being able to commit a Digimon that is powerful, has a lot of good inherited effects, that will stay on the field, that you know will stay on the field against your bond matchups, against your Jesmon, you know, your security control, your 3 Musketeers, with all the powerful removal they have, you know that this guy will be able to survive. I think that makes the deck really powerful. I would probably put this at like a 1.5 status. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to put Machinedramon in tier 1, but I do think it is a really solid deck overall. and you guys will definitely see me playing that once I get my hands on EX1 cards. But guys, that is the list. That is the entire list I wanted to kind of go through. Mainly, those were all the decks I want to talk about. One honorable mention I will talk about is Rookie Rush. I still do actually think Rookie Rush is tier 1, so pencil that in on my list. I do think Rookie Rush is still really good, despite cards like Gewaltstromer and Ultimate Flare existing. I think it's still solid, okay? I mean, the bonds are basically Rookie Rush decks that just occasionally make a level 7. So, anyways, guys, so what do you think of my list going into the EX1 format? Let me know down in the comment section below. What decks did I not talk about that you hopefully want to mention to me? Tell me why your favorite deck is or isn't on here, and feel free to disagree with me. I would love to know your guys' opinions. But guys, that is going to be the video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.